Let's bring up my notes here, and then we're ready. Well, thank you everyone for coming out. I hope you're in the right Zoom place. Thank you for coming tonight to our event around the anthology Writing the Virus. It is one of the first literary anthologies to respond to the initial months of the COVID pandemic. The collection is drawn from writing published between mid-April and as recently as this September in StatORec magazine. The anthology's 31 contributors explore the experience of lockdown, quarantine, social distancing, and the politicization of the virus from a wide variety of perspectives, and groups their works under sections in the anthology titled Chronicling the Pandemic, The Anxiety of Distance, Writing Against the Virus, To COVID with Love, Invisible Danger, and the Fallout. As co-editor Andrea Scrima writes in her introduction, it's our belief that these pieces of writing, composed in unusual times and under considerable pressure, will endure as documents of a period of history will endure as documents of a particular period of history, testimonies to states of mind we will quite possibly have forgotten as we turn our attention to the new challenges facing us. With us tonight are three of those 31 contributors, Jon Roemer, David Rio Winner, and Caille Millner, who will be reading from their pieces. After they have done so, we'll have a conversation about their essays and what we've made thus far of these long months living with the pandemic. So the first up is Jon Roemer. He's the publisher and senior editor of the award-winning book publisher Outpost19 and author of the novel 5 Windows. He's queer and based in San Francisco, and his writing has appeared in The Millions, the San Francisco Chronicle, and elsewhere, and his essay, Uncertainty Ever After, appears in Writing the Virus. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, everybody, for being here on this dark, chilly night. I'm just going to jump into this. Actually, I should say first, as Oscar was intimating, that many of these essays are kind of time capsules. They're written at another time, even, 3 or 4 or 6 months ago, it was another time in the pandemic. So what my essay does is capture a particular moment of panic, of when I wasn't sure about the relevance of writing literary novels and what exactly I was supposed to be doing with my time as a writer. So that was that moment. It was a moment when we were in full force here in San Francisco, and George Floyd had just been killed, and but the fires had yet to start. So it was in that special in-between time that if you can take yourself back to that moment. Anyway, it's called Uncertainty Ever After. I spend too much time thinking about uncertainty. As a writer and editor, I think about what pulls a story forward. Will our heroine lose everything? Will our hero make it home safe? It's a state that I enjoy, reveling in knowing what's next. I make the space to do it, to engage in imagining horrible loss. But this week, after several weeks, uncertainty has run out of fun. The path ahead feels too urgent for speculation, for the work of a novel. Should novels even be a priority right now? I know the proper answer. Imaginative work is how we change, how we find new directions, but it's happening so fast. What feels monumental this morning could get outdone tomorrow night. The uncertainty of an invisible virus has crashed into the certainty of George Floyd's moral cause, which has fiercely pivoted to the uncertainty of remedies. It's very hard to say how this year will end, except as a measure of how we care about each other. Since the start of our coronavirus troubles, I've been watching other writers express their expectations. A week before George Floyd was killed, I listened to 2 clever and famous poets talk about the impact of COVID-19, how its disruption will usher in a new era, ending racism, homophobia, and patriarchy, along with capitalism's rapid collapse. It's a very bright outlook. In fact, I thought they were being funny, and I laughed with my dog. When I looked at the screen again, their smiles were kind of wry, like they knew this was wishful thinking, but maybe only kind of. Like right now, maybe who can really say? The next week, following Floyd's killing, I got Roxane Gay's take in an essay explaining that a new path to equality is not on its way. Eventually, she wrote, doctors will find a coronavirus vaccine, but Black people will continue to wait, despite the futility of hope, for a cure for racism. That's very different from the radical poets. Gay isn't so rosy. She doesn't think we can imagine our way out of this mess. And then this week, Anna Devere Smith called herself a hopeaholic. Smith's theater piece Twilight reflected on the Rodney King riots, and as she's done before, she called on writers and artists to grow our moral imagination. With a wincing look at a TV anchor, she described our imagination as not as robust as it can be. Well, ouch, but also yes. Less than a year ago, I published a novel crafted around a moment in time, aiming to capture the pressures of reshaping San Francisco. My focus was on the neighborhood, how proximity has lost its potential for identity, and how modern urban life can be so solitary it can skew our measures of ourselves and reality. The same pressures are still here, but new ones have piled on. And the book's relevance, as always, is in the hands of the reader. I also wrote it with a very open ending, wanting the protagonist to arrive at a new awareness, but still reside in the same place, with a lot of the same problems. That was important to me to dramatize a recognition of shared responsibilities. It's not autobiographical. The narrator is even more of a buffoon than I am, but I think that's a condition I'm trying to describe today. My anxiety around a lack of movement, which is mandated here in this phase of the pandemic, and my fear of failed imagination, which even the sharpest poets and writers are facing. Late February, early March felt like a horror movie. The fast, almost tidy way the pandemic was unfolding and the way cable news filled an expository role. It looked like a Soderbergh split screen concoction, like Contagion on replay a decade ago, until the spectacle got repetitive, the numbers got close to home, and angry people started filling my streets. It's important, I think, that it felt like a movie, like it's a story we already know, even if the actual lived experience has been entirely new and challenging, because that means we're up to speed. A writer and an editor has already anticipated our uncertainties, so we at least know the common wisdom, and we'll be able to move quickly. But writing quickly hasn't always been my thing, and now more than ever, it's probably smart to work without expectations, without a sense of an ending. So I'm listening, taking notes, moving things around, because new thinking sometimes comes from rearranging old ideas. I'm still interested in the tension between individual and communal obligations. I'm still looking to greater minds. I'm still hoping for a time when uncertainty feels a lot less perilous. Thank you.
Thank you, Jon. Also, by the way, before we get further into the evening, this is a reminder that you can get a copy of the anthology by clicking the link you see right there in the chat. That alone won't do it. I believe you have to actually order from there, but that'll take you to where you need to be to get a copy of the anthology. So our next reader is Dario David Winner. He is the author of Tyler's Last and The Cannibal of Guadalajara. His work has appeared in the Village Voice, the Kenyon Review, the Iowa Review of the Millions, and other publications in the US and the UK. He's the fiction editor of the Rome-based magazine The American, senior editor for StatORec, a regular contributor to the Brooklyn Rail, and editor of Writing the Virus. His essay, The Daisy Assassin, appears in the anthology. Good evening, David.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to read the end of my anthology contribution. It's about running up and down stairs near a monument to George Washington in Brooklyn's Prospect Park, and my anger at those not respecting distance or wearing masks as if I were a security guard in Foucault's famous panopticon. Necessary detail: some Hasidic Jewish communities in Brooklyn ignored COVID restrictions, ostensibly making my part of Brooklyn more dangerous than it would have been. It is a glorious sunny day in the park, mid-Passover. There are hundreds of people and many Hasids. It is slow going on the stairs. I have to stop off often to keep proper distance. Friendly dogs come my way, but I must not pet them. They may carry the virus on their fur, or I could be carrying the virus, bringing it to their owners. A Hasidic girl, 14 or 15 maybe, and a Hasidic boy of about 10 are walking below me on the steps. I have paused to allow them to pass, but the boy inexplicably turns around and dashes towards me. When he's only a couple of feet away, I plunge off the stairs, losing my balance and murdering plant life. The boy has turned around again and begun to head back to his sister when the words, "Excuse me," flee my mouth without proper input from my brain. No adult is around. The girl is the closest thing. I can see her hesitate. She hears me, but doesn't know what to do about the strange man addressing her. "Excuse me," I say again, and she stops and looks up at me. "Can you tell him," I pontificate, gesturing towards her brother. "Can you tell him to stay away from people?" The expression on her face still haunts me. Confusion, fear. I must have looked so terrifying in my sweaty gym clothes and ridiculous mask. She may not have seen how close her brother had come to me. She may not have known what this all was about. This could be the anti-Semitism that she's been warned about. Do I want her to wear a gold star? Will I shatter her family's shop windows? Drag her, her brother, and her parents to some place resembling the camps in which her great-great-grandparents had escaped? Trump urges people to liberate themselves from quarantine in Michigan and Virginia. As the two people who look in on my elderly father in Charlottesville may be Trump supporters, I beg him to keep clear. There's silence on the phone. "Well," he says, "I'll do my best." There's nothing more I can do. I can bark down at the disobedient from my treehouse. I can terrify teenage Hasidic girls, but Virginia is hundreds of miles away, far from my panopticon. The next time I find my way to Lookout Hill, I regard Washington's ominous words emblazoned upon his statue. "Good God, what brave fellows I must this day lose." Of course, I don't know the future of myself and the other not so brave fellows and females on the stairs, but the community college classes I've been teaching remotely for weeks have taken a dark turn. My students live 2 rivers away from me in impoverished, ungentrified neighborhoods in Jersey City. My middle-aged white mug appears on their computer screens like some big brother figure, as I feel obligated to show myself, but very few choose to reveal those faces or their living spaces. Fewer and fewer of them log on, only about 20 of them still participating. Awkwardly, I've asked my classes how everyone was doing and have received bracing, if non-committal responses. "Okay, fine, okay." Then I get an email from Gregory, living with his mom and stepdad. He's too upset to deal with the stupid assignment I've concocted about Corona because his cousin and his aunt have died, and his mother is tested positive. Tears well up in Gregory's eyes the next time we encounter each other on Zoom. 2 students have it in an evening class. One participates from home, the other sleeps through most of the days. A student from Turkey and another from Morocco report to the class about the shit shows in their countries. The following day, April 23rd, I learned that sweet Andrea, who came from Ecuador as a toddler, is doing poorly. His father, who is younger than I am, has just died from it. I speculate about what I can't know. Adriel's father may not have had the luxury of working from home. For him and so many other immigrants from the global south, the problem may not be being overzealously monitored in a panopticon, but being sent out to work in the dangerous world outside. On the stairs at the height of the pandemic, I learned that my friend Louis Luca, whose cancer treatment was deemed inessential, was dying. I'm going to read just a minute of something I'm working on about Luca. Annotated partial list of Luca lovers. The Haitian girl, bizarre story that I don't remember and never quite believed. Angel, dancer, stenographer, took dictation from a sexy young Fidel Castro after the company Angel worked for got nationalized after the revolution. Left Havana for New York in the early 60s, following a lover with a romantic sounding name, Luis Gerando, rather than fleeing communism. Told stories of a naive young Luca who he educated and deflowered. Louis' absolute closest friend until Angel died of leukemia in 2009. Guy, waspy Southern Richmond lover that Louis liked to boast about. Adolfo, lived with Louis on Plaza Street near the Brooklyn Museum, then bought a house with him in Sunset Park. The screwed up electricals helped bankrupt Louis in the late 80s. During one of the nadirs of their relationship, Adolfo hid spells written on pieces of paper, rotten food and dead small animals in drawers and cubbies throughout Louis' apartment. Santeria curses. Despite his lifelong aversion to Catholicism, Louis hired a priest to exorcise the place. Abel, Mexican guy who once got so angry with Louis that he chased Louis and Angel around with a knife, missing bodies and body parts, but carving a deep gash into a cutting board, which I witnessed myself. Franco. More handsome than a young Al Pacino, his tough exterior masked a penchant for tears. In Louis' telling, 18-year-old Franco picked up Louis at a Bay Ridge tanning salon. Soon thereafter, he was going down on him while Louis was driving to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. So sorry for all the Brooklyn references in our Bay Area reading, but thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Now, I'd like to introduce our final reader before we go into our discussion. She's Caille Millner. She's the author of The Golden Road, Notes on My Gentrification. Her short fiction has appeared in the Southern Review Zyzzyva Best American Short Stories 2016, and her essays have appeared in Michigan Quarterly Review, the Paris Review Daily. Her essay, Something New, is in the anthology. Good to see you, Caille.
Good to see you, Oscar. And I'm just going to read from the beginning of the essay I have in this anthology, which is so lovely. Thank you, Jon, for putting this together, and thank you to the other readers. A few weeks before my city issued a shelter-in-place order, I gave birth to my first child. While I was learning how to be a mother, the coronavirus pandemic was decimating economies and cleaving communities. It was disproportionately killing Black Americans and laying bare the brutal costs of the country's collective unwillingness to invest in everything, from basic social goods to public spirit. The week before my city was scheduled to begin the process of lifting its shelter-in-place order, it instituted a curfew to try and control what began as protests against the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and that age-old American menace, wanton destruction of Black life by agents of the state. Within days, the protests had morphed into the century's largest multiracial indictment of institutions and ideas that have failed to provide even a semblance of opportunity to Black people, and increasingly, everyone else. In other words, I have spent the past few months welcoming an infant into a world order that is rightfully under attack. In large part, it's under attack because it's failed to protect my child and all who resemble her. It's sobering, but not surprising, that the earliest to face death by disease due to official neglect have chosen to risk their own lives by taking to the streets against their deaths by official violence. Those with the least to lose are the best equipped to lead. While the people are protesting in the streets and dying in the hospital corridors, my days are quiet. I feed the baby, I change the baby to sleep, over and over again. Initially, I was racked with guilt over my embrace of constancy and repetition, while the old structures crumbled out. So many brave people were fighting to expand the world's imagination. But repetition offers a spiritual dimension for those who are patient enough to listen for it. The baby is my mantra, and the repetition over and over again, we must explain police violence. Over and over again, we tell them of the burdens they will face and the worry they must carry. When we finish with each of these explanations, we embrace them over and over again because we know the world will not. Creating an atmosphere of love amidst this repetition of violence and fear is one of the impossible tasks Black mothers are called on to do. And I knew it would come for me eventually, but I was astonished that it had come so soon. During the first few days of protest, repetition was what saved me. The hardest moments were when I was nursing, because that was when I had short blocks of time to scroll through the news of tear gas protesters and murderous demands from the highest levels of government. To distract myself from this terror, I started listening to John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. I came to it as an innocent because I really don't know anything about jazz. I picked the album because I wanted to hear something pleasant, something meditative, something without a lot of lyrics. But what few lyrics they are. At the beginning of the album, Coltrane chants, "A love supreme, a love supreme, a love supreme," over and over again. Like me, like Black America, he's stuck in repetition. Then he begins his famous improvisation, or at least what seems to be his famous improvisation. It's actually the same riff, played in all 12 possible keys. Coltrane is repeating the same thing over and over again. He is creating his mantra. With repetition comes the possibility of transformation. With repetition comes the possible breakthrough of love. Once I recognized the pattern Coltrane had laid out, I was able to hear something different from the streets. These were not the protests of 1968 or 1992 or even 2015. Instead of dissipating, they grew larger. The usual propaganda was employed about order, about looters, about property. But somehow it had lost some of its strength. Instead of being undermined, the protest attracted more age groups, more races, more solidarity, and more imagination. The repetition of despair had opened a crack for something new to seep through. You might even call it love.
Thank you, Kai. Now as we, first of all, thank you all three for those readings. They were very lovely. I think we could probably some of an understatement to say that having read the anthology, there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of ground we could possibly cover. But I'm gonna try my best attempt to see if we can maybe talk about a few things that stick out to me, or at least that seem to me to maybe something that could make for an interesting conversation tonight. But a lot of these things I think are sort of like big issues, larger issues that obviously that the anthology addresses. But before we dive into those, I just want to ask you a question about, if you will, the picayune. That's to say, how important is it that we don't forget the little things right now about living in this time? So for example, I won't soon forget the violence of a Scott Atlas or the cruelty of a Mitch McConnell. But what about the details of living in close quarters for so long, of negotiating the travails of everyday life under such grinding and sorrowful circumstances? What do you think, Kai?
I mean, we're all still kind of in it, aren't we? Like, it's all sort of just one foot in front of the other and day to day, every moment. I'd be curious to hear what David and Jon have to say about this too, because I'm not sure I have an answer to that yet, even though we're so deep in it still.
David, what do you think? Like, for example, in your essay, you know, I keep thinking of you having to jump off the stairs and then smashing the daisies, hence the title, The Daisy Assassin, or the flowers that you're trampling. But these little details of what it means to live under, you know, again, the sort of weight.
Well, I don't really have an answer either, except that for myself, and I hope for others, that I was pretty angry at first, and I think it was an anger that in the case of what I talked about, I kind of took it out on somebody else. But mostly it was just playing out in my head. People who were not taking this seriously, people who were not being careful, people who were not wearing masks, and I, you know, I understand being angry with them, but I that's not how I feel anymore. I think that was something that comes from a rational response to people being irrational, but it also came from a frustration and a kind of claustrophobia One thing I've kind of noticed among people where I am here in Brooklyn is that there are the sort of, evil lunatic fringe who want us all to die, obviously. But then among reasonable people who are interpreting how they should live their lives and transact business, there's tremendous divergency in what some people feel safe about and some people don't feel safe about. And my only hope is that I see this in people I know kind of being on the edge of bursting into frustration and anger. I just hope that as we, things get worse, that we, are tolerant of each other in all ways.
Is this part of what, in the afterword to the anthology, you write about how so much of this is the complicated calculus called distancing?
Yes.
An existential alteration of human contact. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. I put it in a more highfalutin way there, but that each of us, I think, again, the people who are insane and evil, obviously, who want people not to wear masks and to be liberated from science and health and from life, to want them to die, basically. But among those of us who are reasonable and sane, we each have our own version of what we think is safe. And once, assuming that this vaccine is real and people do take it and things get better, I think this all won't be forgotten. And we'll be kind of moving forward with the memory of how we transacted this time.
Sorry, Oscar,
please.
I was just because David said something about anger and feeling angry with people who wouldn't wear masks and won't basically take care of other people. And I just thought about a conversation I had with someone who said that, at first he also felt a tremendous amount of anger. And I have also felt a lot of anger on the subject, David. And then he said that he started to understand that people who refused to do it were participating in this form of denial that was protective to who they were and who their sense of self was and how they could understand the world, and that if they gave that up, they would just crumble. And it sort of helped me feel a little bit more sympathetic, although I still have my moments. Once I started understanding, like, okay, if, the importance of denial towards those.
Yeah. I was going to say that, tell me what you think of this. I too felt that anger, particularly around March and April, as things were getting so awful, particularly in New York City and in Italy, when we were starting to see just the deaths, just an avalanche of deaths. And I wonder now, as we are on the cusp of what looks to be like a horrific December, when we're over 266,000 dead, that even though there is a vaccine in the offing, we know that this month is going to be something awful. I wonder if in this situation, are we at a point of exhaustion? That's to say that even anger is towards people who aren't doing what they should, who are in defiance of public health experts and this sort of thing, where maybe has anger replaced, as pity replaced this? Has something else replaced that feeling? John, what do you think?
Pity. I've been communicating with David almost from the start about sharing his kind of anger. So pity, pity for the numbers in the hospitals and numbers who aren't going to come out, and pity for people who are just struggling with a shutdown economy and unbearable living situations, I guess. What I kind of cure for this, I think, a kind of way we can all find common ground out of all this, are these details that you started with, is somebody coming back and telling this story so we all remember what it was like for everyone. And it includes the stories of people who didn't wear masks, but it could be a kind of kaleidoscope, or it could be a kind of multi-perspective thing, but there just need to be some accounting of what we've been through, and so people can understand that and find their own way to empathy to it. It's I'm looking forward to a time when we can look back at these 6 months and then the next 6 months and have some accounting for it. Have somebody put it into some order, have the right writer or writers make sense of this for us, and through that, find the ways we should be caring for each other. I mean, it's already a blur for me. It's already tough for me to remember a March from April. And it was tough at the time anyway, but it's even harder now. And the more I can recall that, the more I can go back to it. And this anthology has helped me with that. The deeper I get back to those feelings of just like, okay, we are in this together. I can't be angry at everyone. And I do need to, keep paying attention to the people who are still going to go to the hospital and who are still suffering at home with unbearable conditions. So I'm looking forward to that storyteller that can make it work, that can really make something of this. We saw it after 9/11, a few years after. That's what writers do well, is make sense of our collective tragedies.
Right. When I think it's becoming clear as we're in the middle of this right now, prefacing this for this next question I have, and I'm thinking it'll be even that much more stark by the time this is over. But what have we learned about the values of our society thus far during the pandemic? What is it that we found out in terms of who do we value in society and what we value?
Well, I want to say that we shouldn't be taking who and what we value from our political leadership right now, right? Because while I can see that on a TV out every day, and looking out my window, I can see people walking by negligent without masks. But I also hear stories and talk to people who are doing really nice, generous things. So I know that these past 6-8 months have brought out an enormous amount of empathy and generosity for people. I think it's important for us to ignore or just kind of disregard the leadership that we've had, and look to each other and start hearing those stories again about who we do love and who we do think are important, who we should prioritize.
David, what do you think?
Well, John mentioned 9/11. One of the funny things about 9/11 was that this is a moment for all of us, obviously, and sort of world events became very local. Like, stuff that had happened in Afghanistan and Egypt and Iraq suddenly was resulting in this, crazy thing in New York. And what I think, this is not an original thought at all, but what we're seeing here, among other things, is we're kind of witnessing fascism. I'm not saying obviously that Trump is Hitler or any stupid stuff like that, but this sort of defiant rejection of science, this refusal to wear masks, this kind of bizarre hypnosis, which just makes no sense to anybody who, I guess, isn't hypnotized. It is like some kind of, it is a global thing, obviously, and we're just getting a tiny taste of it. And that's, it's horrible, but it's also kind of instructive, though I have no idea what we're learning from it.
Caille, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's just all been laid very bare. I mean, just the fact that our hospitals across the country, this is still the case, that they're struggling with personal protective equipment for doctors and nurses and healthcare workers. And at the same time, I mean, it was very clear, certainly with the protests in support of Black lives, you know, that the police and the National Guard and all of the institutions that are designed to sort of control people and keep them incarcerated, they had all the resources that you could possibly imagine. They had tanks on the streets, they had everything they needed. So it was, I mean, I feel like it was, everything was just laid very bare to see. And all of the, you know, all of the false stories had been sort of peeled away. And it was just, this is who we value. And this is who we value are the people who can, you know, keep those of you who are surplus to the economy and, you know, surplus to the power structure in whatever sort of form. And then people who are saving, people who are more vulnerable, disabled, elderly, people who work on the front lines of, you know, delivering all of your packages and keeping the supermarkets running, all the people who have been deemed expendable, you know. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens to their lives. So I feel like it was really a moment where it's just been, everything's laid bare. And, you know, of course you see Wall Street has gone crazy. It's been the best several quarters they've had in the last 25 years. So it's a moment of just extreme honesty about how this country has been set up. And I think it's also a moment of extreme imagination where people are saying, we can't keep going down this path. We just can't do it. And we will imagine something new. So it's a time of a breakthrough. And I think 2021 is going to be really, really interesting and potentially, you know, lots of great things and lots of probably horrible things happen.
Yeah, you know, reading your essay, and it's, if I can call it, hard-nosed hopefulness. I was thinking how everything that we're witnessing, if not experiencing personally right now, under this, you know, catastrophic handling of the pandemic in this country, will be added to those added to the items of that repetition that you write about, you know, the repetition of that despair, the public repetition, not a private one, but the one that we say out loud to each other, that perhaps, to your point, can lead to that awakening. That, you know, it's hard to conceive of us coming through this and not being changed in some sort of profound way. Not just simply in the sense of, boy, that was awful, but no, but in the sense of saying, we can't live like this anymore. I want to ask one more thing though before I want to turn over to Q&A. The folks here, if you want to ask a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'll read, you know, and I'll read them out loud. But this is, you know, I wanted to ask you guys just very personally, how are you managing to do your writing during this time? For some folks, I know it hasn't been a terrible thing to try to do their work, but for other people, it's been a slog. Jon?
It's been a slog. It's always a slog. But on the one hand, things have slowed down so much that it's a little easier to create time to work. I mean, once I worked through my own personal panic and some of my anger and general helplessness, I realized, okay, you could be carving out time to work. So with everything stopped around me, at least tried to create that time to do it, and I've made some progress.
Mm. How do you feel about it? Do you feel the same, David?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I went through a lot, what probably many people who write went through, sort of like regret about past projects seeming so utterly irrelevant, but then coming to terms with that, because, you know, even if the other era was, you know, January of last year, it was another era. And in terms of writing now, I mean, oh God, I don't know. I all sorts of crazy things, and I think that I am influenced by the insanity of these times, as I'm just unfinished fragments of things that are completely insane, and see what happens. Yeah.
And Caille?
Well, I haven't been writing very much, to be honest with you, but I have found that it's actually easier to focus as long as I'm not writing about the present.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about things that maybe rhyme with this moment but aren't exactly this moment, that's been a little bit easier.
This is something I think that crops up in various ways in the anthology, if not directly, but what do we think is going to be the mental health fallout from all of this? I mean, we're already seeing, you know, suicides are way up, and you know, and these sort of things. But I wonder, will we be shell shocked in the same way that people were who like endured the Great Depression? You know, you hear stories about people's grandparents who they were still hoarding sugar packets, things like this, and you know, disposable, you know, utensils, because you never knew when this thing would strike again, when you would be suddenly impoverished. And I was wondering, is it going to be, will it be a situation where years from now, babies such as yours, Caille, will see us acting in strange ways, full of nervous behavior that they can't, you know, that'll seem, if not inexplicable to them, but just mysterious? Nobody wants to.
I'm sorry, I thought you called on Caille. Go ahead, David.
Oh well, no, but yes, but yes.
Go ahead, David.
Oh, well, just to go back to what we were saying before about anger, I think, I mean, of course, the obvious thing, we all know this, is that once this is over, there's, you know, obviously.
Oh my
so
gosh.
But yeah, but let's pretend that there is this vaccine, and we take this, and, you know, of course, the problem of people not believing it's real and not taking it, but this thing is contained, and then we kind of look around us, and we do think about the people who were not wearing masks, who were kind of endangering us and didn't experience. But it wasn't there. That was something, a kind of Deus ex machina thing. It wasn't creating this complete irrational behavior and this complete sort of tension, and that we'll have to live with, you know. Okay, so at some point, I presume, if we like to go to bars, we'll go to a bar and we won't have to wear a mask. But then you'll be looking at somebody and thinking, oh, you know, maybe you were always doing this. This kind of memory of who did what. I mean, I don't like to think we'll think that, but
Yeah,
I fear that.
I think you consider just what it does. I mean, you know, right now I'm thinking of all the children who are having terrible time doing distance learning, and what that's going to look like, you know, later on for them in terms of, I don't know how it's going to affect them, what sort of traumas they may, you know, be nursing later into the future. But also think of such things too, you know, what it would be then to your point, David, being a essential worker, and then going back, you know, to your job, you can find a job, because we don't know, you know, Lord knows what shape the cashier, or you go back to your job as a server in a restaurant. Certain people before who, you know, to what you were saying, you know, wearing masks, or people that you know for a fact, you know, may not value your life as much as you would have hoped. I just see this sort of the consequences of this, you know, perhaps playing out much longer than we would think. You know, not just on a political scale, but also just I think on a very personal scale. You know, one thing I'm for, and you tell me what you think, is I like the idea of suddenly the public space meaning a lot more, of people wanting to be around each other, of, you know, the idea of a public life, let's just say life outside of your home. I don't know about you, you guys tell me, I'm absolutely, I almost have a Pavlovian reaction now to social media. I just don't want to get in it. It's too much.
Oh, definitely. And, you know, I've realized that I've taken my queer community in San Francisco totally for granted. Like so many events, regular events, landmark events that happen every year that I just, you know, kind of casually went through and didn't really care about. I'm not a great group party person, but now, yes, I want to go and support those things more than ever. And I've also learned to like rediscover and reinvest in the pleasure of sitting around a table and cooking. Sure, we're all really sick of it, but I mean that's a skill and a kind of habit and a kind of value that I've really reinforced in myself. Having to do it all the time, always being home and cooking. And I know that once I'm able to go out again, I'm going to look back and say like, hey, that was great too. I really had a lot of intimacy there. I really had a lot of self-discovery there. So that it's going to work both ways. Going to be happy to be in those spaces again, and going to look back and say like, you know, that I really did discover things at home. That's about the most optimistic way I can put the kind of mental health consequences, because I do worry about other people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you about the anthology itself. You know, it's so tricky trying to now that's topical, because you don't really know, you know, how long will it be topical for. But at what point in the production of this anthology did it become clear to you that, my goodness, not only is this going to be topical, but the situation into which it sees publication, we could be worse off than we were back in the spring? Could you talk a little bit about
David's the man to talk about that.
either John or David?
John is too. I mean, one thing I can certainly say,
Okay.
I think Oscar's absolutely right. I think that one thought that all of us working in the anthology, maybe John didn't, maybe he was not naive in this way, but in the back of our minds, we did sort of were particular moment as the peak, the crisis, the worst moment, just in terms of the virus. And you know, so you're reading about the second wave, but yeah, I think that this notion that somehow that there should be somebody else should do another anthology, or the problem maybe they are about people are writing about, different writers are writing about what's going on now as things are getting worse again, and it's a different. We're the same people, those of us are still standing. You know, it's a different time already. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think we kind of made the assumption, in a way, in the fact we're chronicling the moment that was the first moment of virus, which of course was at the same time as the Floyd killing and the protests and everything together. But you know, as Kai was saying, what the amazing thing about the protests is how they didn't stop. They kept on going. They will keep on going. And you know, this was the virus. The anthology did center around a unique moment, but there are more moments to come. Obviously, they'll continue.
Is there, again, if everyone, if you would like to ask a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat. David, regarding your essay, you didn't, I don't believe you read this part, but you did mention in your piece people you knew who were sick, who had contracted COVID, and I just wanted to ask, how are they now?
Oh, thank you for asking. I've been, I read that little thing that my friend died when his treatment was deemed inessential, but he did not die of COVID. People I knew who had COVID everyone survived. But and this is so universal, and everybody here has stories. Maybe some people here have even experienced it. I hope not. That they're not the same. Anyone who's had this is true anecdotally, and this is true universally. Anyone who had even a moderate case, the people I know who've had it. They don't really talk. We don't really talk about this. But my essay talks about my wife's cousin who was nearly intubated. She had an 86 blood oxygen, which was when my mother was dying, when my wife's father was dying. It was not anywhere near that bad. It was just insane. But she wasn't intubated. They put she was in the hospital for a few days with oxygen, and she survived, and she went back to work. And I just was, watching like a podcast or something about the lingering effects of COVID, and I just texted her, and for the first time, because I wasn't thinking, I was kind of selfishly not thinking, her brain working right. She said, she called it COVID brain, like she's just not, things are just things. It's sort of like she's almost had like a terrible seizure or a stroke or something. No, she's not. But I didn't even know that. And I wonder if there's even if people who've gone through this or even, sharing it that much with people. I don't know. But thank you for asking that question. And the answer is that thankfully everyone I know who've had it is okay. I hope the same for you.
No, I'm very happy to hear that. I think to kind of circle back around to that question of pity and anger, John, I think one of the things that I think that's so exasperating, and we've talked about this already, is just all the misinformation that's being shoveled out, all the just the flat out lies, that, I find, just as you wrote, coming to scold. I didn't actually, say anything, but boy, in my mind was I reading the riot act to people. And after a while, I found myself feeling sort of ashamed of that. One, because I think at some point we all slip up. We've probably done something, realize, oh my God, was I actually 6 feet apart from that person? Or how long did I have my mask off when I was to that friend in their driveway? We were 6 feet across. I just took it down a little too long. What was I thinking? But now, that's tempered by just the idea of there's people sort of being led to their deaths, or that's to say, are being told quite outright that there is nothing going on here. And you read about this, like in Nebraska, you read about people in ICUs yelling at the nurses and saying, this is a hoax. What am I really sick from? And I guess this is where you get that pity, tempered though again by the fact that their, if you will, horrible state could affect you. That the fact that they've been duped could also mean you get hurt. And I think this is sort of like what's going on within us. It's that conflict between that anger and that feeling sorry for them. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I wish I felt more pity. I wish I felt more sorry for them. And I know that's just that's a factor of the little bubble that I live in, a little tower that I reside inside of. It's just because I can afford to be that protected, to be that distant, I guess. I just am so quick to reside in anger. It's hard to get away from that. How shall I put this? We had a good friend die 2 months ago from COVID and some other contributing factors, and it was tough to share with other people because it is such a news item. It's such a headline thing. Like, no, this was an actual friend and a person who was here Thanksgiving last year and wasn't here this year. It's hard to be able to communicate that to people in a way that can impact them and change their behavior. And, you know, there finally was a chance for me to feel something other than anger, you know, because anger isn't just about mass, it's about the misinformation, it's about the propaganda, it's about people being led down a horrible path. So that when I had this experience, enormous grief just individually for this person that would have happened under any circumstances, but suddenly, you know, all the hospital beds, all the pictures on MSNBC are suddenly very much more personal. It's very difficult to be able to communicate that. Not the first friend I've ever lost, not my first pandemic even, but to be able to do this, you know, able to communicate that to other people in this atmosphere of denial and anger and anxiety and fear. It's a very difficult time to kind of mourn and experience that kind of loss in a way that can hopefully help other people.
Well, with that, then I just want to say again, thank you so much for publishing this anthology. And thank you so much, David, for co-editing it, and Caille, I think we may have lost the technical difficulties. Thank you so much for, you know, for having contributed to it, because there's so many different views on what we're going through right now in the anthology, so many different experiences. I think the themes are central, but the approaches are varied. And I think it just goes to show how important it is that we start sitting down with this situation now and try to make sense of it, because we're going to be making sense of it, I think, for a very long time. And having those first impressions is going to be, I think, very important to understanding where we're at in the, you know, in the future. So, Jon, thank you so much, and David, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. You know, I know you probably just had to maybe hopefully walk a few feet to get to your laptop, but I've been doing these long enough to know that psychically that could be like driving on the freeway in traffic these days.
Yes. Yes.
So I and I mean that in total sincerity. So thank you very much for spending time with us. Yeah, because I know a lot of you, because of your work, have to be on Zoom a lot, etc. So it is truly appreciated. So thank you very much. And Caille, I think I hear you, and thank you so much.
Yes. Oh, thank you. And thank you for having us and for guiding this conversation, Oscar.
Yes, thank you, Oscar.
Oh, you're most welcome. So now here, I guess we just tell, well, just, I guess, have a good night. And, you know, as something I hope we will hear very soon, as we used to always hear at the bar, you don't have to go, you can't stay here.
Thank you, Oscar. Good night.
Thank you so much, Oscar. Thank you so much, everybody.
Oh, you're welcome. Good night, everyone.
Good night.